"When I grow up, I'll marry you," said the little girl. 18 years later, the Alpha King returned. The village lay at the edge of the forest, shrouded in mist and shadow. Its wooden houses, worn by time, seemed to lean into one another for comfort. Children ran through narrow dirt streets, their laughter echoing against the hills, yet none dared wander far into the forest. Not because of wild animals, but because of the tales whispered by the elders, the tales of the Alpha King, a ruler feared and revered, who lived deep within the dark trees where sunlight barely touched the ground. Ilara, a little girl of 8, had never been afraid of stories. She was small, with sharp brown eyes and hair that tumbled over her shoulders like untamed vines. She loved exploring the edges of the forest, where the moss grew thick, and the air smelled of damp earth and hidden flowers. She often imagined that the forest spoke to her, that it recognized her curiosity and bravery. One late afternoon, when the sky bled orange and purple, she wandered further than she had ever gone before. The mist curled around the tree trunks like ghosts, and the air felt heavy with secrets. Ilara's heart raced, but not with fear. It was the thrill of stepping into the unknown. Then she saw him. He emerged from the shadow of an ancient oak, tall and commanding. His presence seemed to bend the light around him, and the mist clung to him as if it feared to touch his skin. His hair was black as midnight, and his eyes were a stormy gray that seemed to pierce through her very thoughts. Even from a distance, Ilara sensed the weight of his power. He was the Alpha King, the figure of the stories, the ruler whose name carried both awe and dread. Yet, as he looked at her, there was a pause in his commanding air, a flicker of something almost tender. Ilara, noticing it, felt a strange pull, a curiosity that was deeper than fear. She took a small step forward. Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "I am Kalen," he said, his voice low, like rolling thunder. "Why does a child wander so far into my forest?" Ilara tilted her head, thinking. "I'm not afraid of stories, and I wanted to see if the forest is really as big and dark as they say." Kalen studied her, and for the first time in many years, a small smile ghosted across his face. "Few are brave enough to come this far," he said. "Even fewer would speak without fear." "I'm not afraid of you," Ilara said boldly, stepping closer, "even though everyone says you're dangerous." Kalen's gray eyes darkened and a low laugh escaped him. It was not cruel, it was strange and musical, like a shadow dancing on water. "Dangerous," he mused. "Perhaps I am, but I admire your courage, little one." Ilara smiled, feeling a warmth in the cold forest air. She noticed how the leaves seemed to tremble around him, how the shadows shifted as if they obeyed his presence. And in that moment, despite the fearsome power radiating from Kalen, she felt a connection she could not explain. "I have a question," she said suddenly. "If someone made a promise to you, would you keep it?" Kalen looked down at her, raising one eyebrow. "A promise?" he asked, his voice gentle but curious. "Yes," she said, gripping the hem of her dress. "A very important promise, a promise about the future." Kalen's eyes narrowed, studying her. "The future is long and promises are fragile. Why do you ask?" Ilara's heart beat faster. Because I want to make a promise to you." She looked up at him with wide, earnest eyes. "When I grow up, I'll marry you." The words hung in the mist, fragile yet bold. Kalen's eyes widened slightly, and for a long moment neither spoke. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. He knew this was impossible. She was a child, and he was a king whose name carried fear and death. But the honesty in her voice struck a chord deep within him, one that he had long buried beneath duty, power, and loneliness. "You speak with such certainty for one so small," he said quietly. "Do you truly understand what you are saying?" "I do," she said firmly. "Even if you are a king, and even if the forest is cursed, I will keep my promise. One day, when I am grown, I will come to you." Kalen's stormy eyes softened, and an emotion he had not felt in decades stirred in his chest. Something protective, almost tender, wrapped around him. Yet he also felt the weight of the impossibility, the danger of allowing himself to care for a mortal child who dared speak such words. "You are fearless," he said finally. "Perhaps it is not the forest that is cursed but those who fear it." Alara laughed, a light ringing sound that broke through the forest's gloom. She reached out her small hand. "Then will you promise me something too?" Kalen tilted his head. "And what is that?" "That you will remember me, even if I must grow up before I can return," she said. Kalen looked at her, and for a brief fleeting moment, the hardened king felt the pull of a promise that would span years. He placed a hand near hers, careful not to touch, and his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I will remember you, little one. Whatever the years may bring, I will not forget." Alara's eyes sparkled with joy. "Then it's a promise," she said. She skipped a little, feeling as though the forest itself cheered for her courage. As she turned to leave, Kalen watched silently, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that the innocence of this promise would someday collide with the reality of his world, a world of power, curses, and enemies who would not hesitate to strike at weakness. And yet, he could not forget her words, nor the fearless light in her eyes. The forest grew darker as the sun sank below the horizon, and Kalen returned to the shadows, his mind restless. Somewhere deep inside, he wondered what the child would become. Would she be strong enough to survive the years that would pass before she returned to him? Would her courage remain, or would the cruel lessons of life extinguish the light he had glimpsed today? Meanwhile, Alara ran home, her small feet kicking up the autumn leaves. Her heart raced not with fear but with hope. She knew that one day she would keep her promise. She did not yet understand the trials that awaited her, nor the danger of loving a king so powerful, but the seed of destiny had been planted. That night as the village slept, the forest whispered. Shadows moved like living things, circling the ancient trees, watching, waiting. Something old and dark had sensed the bond between the child and the Alpha King, a bond that could alter the fate of kingdoms. And it stirred with a slow, deliberate hunger, as though it would not rest until it had tested the promise that had been made. Kalen sat in his hidden hall deep in the forest, staring into the flickering torchlight. The memory of the child's voice echoed in his mind, haunting and bright all at once. "When I grow up, I'll marry you." He clenched his fist. He had never allowed himself hope, never allowed himself weakness, yet this little girl had broken through the walls he had built for decades. And he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that the promise she made was not just words. It was a thread that bound their fates together, a thread that destiny itself had woven into the tapestry of their lives. Outside, the forest exhaled, a chill wind rustling the leaves. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes gleamed. The Alpha King and the fearless child had met, and though the years between them were long, the first spark of a bond that would shake kingdoms, challenge curses, and defy fate had been lit. And somewhere in the darkness, the forest waited to see if the spark would grow, or consume them both. 18 years had passed since Alara's fearless words echoed in the forest. She had grown into a young woman, her courage now sharpened by years of survival and quiet study. Her hair, once soft and untamed, now fell in gentle waves down her back, and her brown eyes carried the weight of knowledge and experience. The village had changed little. It remained perched at the edge of the ancient forest, its people wary of the dark power lurking beyond the trees. Yet Alara moved among them like a light, calm, strong, and unafraid of shadows that would make others tremble. Despite her life in the village, Alara never forgot her promise. It was a seed planted in her childhood, a secret hope that had grown silently within her. She often wandered the forest edges, sensing the same power she had felt all those years ago. The forest had changed too, its darkness deeper, its silence heavier, and yet she felt the same pull as a child. Somewhere inside, she knew Kalen still ruled the forest, and that one day their paths would cross again. Alara had learned much in the years since their first meeting. She had studied the herbs and the old magics whispered about in her village. She could calm fevered bodies with her potions and speak words of healing that even the villagers regarded as miraculous. But her heart remained restless, haunted by the memory of a boyish promise and a king whose presence had stirred something she could not name. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast the village in gold and shadow, a rider approached. The villagers paused, tense, their eyes following the horse as it came closer. The figure atop the horse was tall, cloaked, and commanding, the kind of presence that made even the bravest soldier hesitate. Alara was in the garden, tending to her herbs when she saw him. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the figure at the forest's edge. The cloak fell back, and there he was, Kalen, the Alpha King, more formidable than she had imagined. Time had only made him stronger, taller, and more dangerous, yet there was a glimmer of recognition in his gray eyes, a flicker of something she remembered from long ago. He dismounted without ceremony, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The villagers murmured among themselves, unsure whether to flee or bow. Kalen's presence alone demanded attention, respect, and fear. But when his gaze fell on Alara, all the noise of the world seemed to fade. "Are you the one who promised me words long ago?" Kalen asked, his voice deep and even, carrying the weight of authority and curiosity alike. Alara straightened, her heart hammering. "Yes," she said quietly, though there was no fear in her tone. "I remember every word." Kalen's eyes softened just slightly, and he studied her carefully. "You have grown," he said, more to himself than to her. "Stronger than I expected, and yet there is still a fire in you." Alara felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. "And you," she said, trying to steady her voice, "have changed too. You are more than I imagined." Kalen's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "I have had 18 years to build power and walls," he replied. "I wonder, can you endure both?" Alara's gaze met his steadily. "I am not afraid," she said. She felt the pulse of the forest around them, the shadows seeming to bend toward him, yet she stood firm. There was no childlike naivete in her now. She had faced hardship, danger, and loss. Still, the memory of her promise was alive in her heart, and it gave her courage. Kalen studied her for a long moment. His kingdom had changed, darkened by enemies who sought to exploit the cursed forest. Rumors spoke of rival lords who desired his power, spies who crept like shadows, and ancient curses that even he could barely control. Yet in that moment, the weight of all that seemed to fall away. He saw the child who had once stood before him, fearless and honest, and the woman she had become, resilient, capable, and unbroken. "You are indeed the one who dared speak words that most would fear to voice," he said finally. "And yet, the world is not kind to those who make promises to kings." Alara's heart tightened. "I know the danger," she admitted, "but I also know that promises are not made lightly. I came to the forest when I was young because I believed in my words. I have lived by them ever since." Kalen's gaze dropped to the ground, as if weighing the truth of her words. Then he raised his eyes, and she saw something rare in him, vulnerability, hidden beneath layers of power and pride. "Few survive childhood with such determination," he said softly. "Fewer still carry it into adulthood. You have kept your promise in heart, if not yet in presence." Alara stepped closer, feeling the pull of a bond she had not understood as a child. "I am here now," she said. "And I am not the same little girl who promised you marriage. I am someone who can stand beside you if you will let me." The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wind still, the shadows stilling as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Kalen looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to wonder, not as a king, not as a ruler feared by many, but as a man who remembered a child's words and felt the stirrings of his own heart. "You speak with courage," he said quietly, "but courage is not enough. There are enemies that linger waiting for weakness, and my kingdom, my forest, It is not a safe place for any who would follow me blindly." "I do not wish to follow blindly," Alara replied. "I wish to stand beside you. Not as a subject, not as a pawn, but as someone who believes in what is right, in what is just. I have grown stronger, not weaker, and I am ready." Kalen's eyes softened further, though the storm of responsibility still clouded his expression. "It is rare to find a mortal who dares speak of partnership with a king," he said. "Most bend to fear, most obey without thought. You are different." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and memories that spanned almost 2 decades. For Alara, it was a reunion of destiny, a moment she had dreamed of since she had spoken her promise. For Kalen, it was a reckoning, a challenge to his own heart and the walls he had built around it. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the quiet, a faint rustling like shadows moving through the trees. Kalen's posture shifted instantly, alert and tense. "Enemies," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "They are near. I have sensed them for weeks, but—" he paused, looking at Alara. "It seems they have come sooner than I expected." Alara's pulse quickened. Danger was no stranger to her, yet the presence of Kalen made it both terrifying and exhilarating. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Kalen turned to her fully, his gray eyes stormy. "We prepare," he said, "and we act together, but know this forest, my kingdom, it is not forgiving. One misstep could mean death for you, for me, for all who stand here." Alara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Fear did not bind her, it sharpened her resolve. She had promised a king her heart, and now that promise would be tested not by words, but by fire, shadow, and the weight of destiny. For hours, they moved through the forest, Alara following Kalen as he surveyed the edges of his domain. Shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, shapes forming and dissolving as if testing them. It was then that Alara felt a chill unlike any she had known, a presence watching, waiting, as if the forest itself had become aware of the bond that had been awakened. Kalen sensed it too. "The curse," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It stirs when hearts are intertwined. Our meeting, our bond, it has awakened something old and powerful, something that tests both strength and will." Alara shivered, but she did not step back. Instead, she held her head high. "Then we face it," she said. "Together." Kalen studied her, a storm of emotion passing through his eyes, fear, pride, desire, and something tender he could not name. "Very well," he said, his voice firm. "Together we shall face what comes. But know this, Alara, the forest, the curse, my enemies, they are only the beginning. The real trial is within us." The wind rose suddenly, stirring the trees into a frenzy. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, dark and sinuous. And in that moment, as the Alpha King and the young woman who had once made a fearless promise stood side by side, the forest seemed to lean closer, watching, waiting, testing them. Alara felt a spark of excitement, mingled with the thrill of danger and the pull of destiny. She had dreamed of this moment for 18 years, and now it had come. But the path ahead was uncertain, filled with peril and challenges she could not yet imagine. Kalen turned to her once more, his gaze intense. "I will not allow you to be harmed," he said, almost fiercely. "Not now, not ever, but you must understand this is only the beginning. Our bond, our promise, it carries consequences greater than either of us can yet see." Alara nodded, her brown eyes steady and resolute. "Then we face them," she said, "because I made a promise. And I intend to keep it." The forest whispered around them, shadows moving like silent sentinels. The bond between the fearless girl and the Alpha King had been rekindled, stronger than time, forged through courage and the weight of destiny. And as the night deepened, both of them knew that the coming days would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. The palace of the Alpha King loomed like a shadow at the heart of the forest, its black spires cutting into the misty sky. Built of stone as dark as obsidian, it seemed to drink the light around it. Only those who had been summoned, or those brave enough to enter unbidden, could cross its threshold and survive the whispers that filled its halls. Ilara approached cautiously, her heart beating fast but her steps steady. Kalen walked ahead of her, every motion radiating authority and control. His presence was overwhelming, like the forest itself had taken human form. The torches along the palace walls cast flickering shadows, and every corner seemed alive, as though the building itself observed them. "You must understand," Kalen said quietly, his gray eyes scanning the dark halls, "that the palace is no safe haven. It is a fortress, yes, but also a place of secrets and dangers. Few who enter here leave unchanged." Ilara nodded, her voice soft but firm. "I understand, but I did not come here for safety. I came because I promised, and promises are not broken, even in fear." Kalen's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Your courage is remarkable," he said. "Few could speak these words with certainty, but courage alone does not prepare one for the weight of power and responsibility." The air between them was heavy with unspoken tension. Years had passed, but in the presence of the other, time seemed suspended. Ilara remembered the small child she had once been, and Kalen remembered the fearless little girl who had dared to promise him her heart. Now both were stronger, scarred by life, and yet drawn together by a bond neither fully understood. They entered the main hall, a cavernous space filled with towering columns and flickering torchlight. The walls were carved with ancient symbols, and the air was thick with the weight of history and magic. Shadows twisted and moved like living things, responding to the power Kalen radiated. "Stay close," Kalen instructed, his voice low, almost a growl. "Enemies are not only outside these walls, some are within. We must be vigilant." Ilara followed, her senses alert. She felt the pulse of magic in the air, the same energy that had once whispered through the forest, guiding her steps. Now it moved faster, reacting to their presence, as if aware that two hearts bound by promise and destiny had returned to this place. As they reached a central chamber, Kalen stopped and turned to her. "The curse of the forest, it is tied to me, and to those I care for. It will test our bond, reveal our fears, and challenge the very core of who we are. Are you certain you wish to face it?" Ilara met his stormy gaze without hesitation. "I do. Whatever comes, I will face it. Not as a child, not as a girl, but as someone who keeps her word." Kalen studied her, the storm in his eyes slowly giving way to a strange, tender light. "Very well," he said. "Then let us begin. But know this, once we step into the heart of the curse, there is no turning back." The chamber grew colder as shadows thickened and twisted around them. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in their bones. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, responding to the power Kalen carried and the courage Ilara embodied. Suddenly, a shadow moved independently of the walls, a shape dark and formless, yet aware. It hovered near the edge of the room, watching. Kalen stiffened. "It is here," he said. "The forest does not forget. It will test us. Prepare yourself." Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she did not step back. "I am ready," she said. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The shadows surged forward, coalescing into forms that mimicked their deepest fears. Kalen's mind flashed with images of betrayal, failure, and the destruction of everything he had built. Ilara's visions were of loss, helplessness, and the breaking of her promise. Kalen raised his hand and the shadows recoiled. "Focus, Ilara," he commanded. "Do not let them control you. The forest feeds on fear, but it cannot touch courage or love." Ilara closed her eyes and drew on her inner strength. She remembered the promise she had made as a child, the hope that had carried her through every lonely night. The shadows shuddered as she called upon that memory, her voice rising in a whisper. "I promised, and I will not break it." The shadow hissed, writhing like smoke, but it could not penetrate the shield of her determination. Kalen moved beside her, his presence a wall of strength, and together they pushed the darkness back. As the chamber fell silent, the tension between them shifted. Kalen turned to her, his eyes softer now, yet still intense. "You are remarkable," he said, almost in awe. "Not many could withstand the first trial, but there are more challenges ahead, and they will test not only your courage but your heart." Alara stepped closer, drawn to him despite the storm around them. "I am not afraid of trials," she said. "I am afraid only of losing what I promised to protect you, and this bond between us." Kaelin's stormy gaze softened into something she had never seen in a king before: vulnerability. He reached out, hesitating only for a moment, then placed his hand gently over hers. "Your promise, it is not only brave, it is dangerous. To love, to hope, to trust, these are risks even kings cannot afford. And yet I find myself drawn to them, drawn to you." Alara felt her heart leap, a mixture of joy and fear. She had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it was here, wrapped in the weight of magic, power, and destiny. "Then let us face whatever comes together," she said. "I will not falter." Kaelin studied her for a long moment, the storm in his eyes clashing with the tenderness now evident. "Very well," he said. "Together we will face the curse, the enemies, and whatever trials the forest lays before us. But know this, the closer we stand, the more the world will notice, and not all who see us will wish us well." The shadows in the chamber stirred once more, whispering warnings in voices ancient and cold. Kaelin's grip on Alara's hand tightened, a silent promise of protection. "The curse is not just of the forest," he said. "It is tied to my blood, my power, and to anyone who dares stand beside me. It will test your heart and it will test mine. But together, perhaps we can survive." Alara nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had come this far, kept her promise, and now she would prove that her courage was more than words. "I trust you," she said softly. Kaelin's eyes darkened with emotion, his usual mask of authority slipping for the briefest moment. "And I must learn to trust as well," he said. "You awaken something in me I thought long dead. It is both frightening and necessary." As they moved deeper into the palace, the air thickened with magic and shadow. Rooms shifted unnaturally, corridors twisting in ways that defied logic. It was as if the very building were testing them, seeking to uncover weakness, fear, or doubt. They reached a large chamber, the center of the palace's magic. Ancient runes glowed on the floor, pulsating with energy that seemed to respond to their bond. Kaelin stepped into the circle, gesturing for Alara to do the same. "Once we enter," he said, "the curse will fully awaken. It will test us, our fears, our desires, our hearts. Are you certain you wish to continue?" Alara took a deep breath, placing her hand in the center of the circle. "I am certain," she said. "I made a promise and I will keep it, no matter the cost." The runes flared and the shadows in the chamber writhed, forming visions from the deepest corners of their minds. Alara saw Kaelin as a boy, alone and haunted, and herself as a child, terrified yet determined. Kaelin saw visions of the people he had failed, the enemies he had crushed, and the cost of his power. But as their hands touched in the circle, their bond became a shield. The visions faltered, the shadows recoiled, and the chamber pulsed with light. They had passed the first test, proving that courage, trust, and love could withstand even the darkest magic. Kaelin turned to Alara, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of relief and awe. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, "and yet this is only the beginning. There will be more trials, more dangers, and more choices that will demand everything from us." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Then we face them together," she said. "I have waited for this moment for 18 years, and I will not falter now." The shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to shiver, as if acknowledging their bond and the strength it carried. But beyond the walls of the palace, unseen eyes watched and waited. The Alpha King and the fearless woman who had once made a child's promise had reunited, and the world around them would soon challenge the depth of their bond in ways neither could yet imagine. The forest shivered under the pale light of dawn. Mist curled around the ancient trees like fingers, and the air was thick with anticipation. The Alpha King's palace stood at the heart of it, black spires piercing the morning sky. From within, Kalen and Alara prepared for what they both knew would be the ultimate test, the curse of the forest and the enemies who had gathered, drawn by the bond between them. Kalen stood at the balcony, his gray eyes scanning the shadows beyond the walls. The forest was alive with movement, shapes twisting in the mist, and a dark force pressed close, waiting for the right moment to strike. He turned when Alara stepped beside him, her presence calm yet unyielding, a strength he had come to depend on. "They are coming," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "The shadow that watches us, it will test everything. You must remain close to me." Alara nodded, placing her hand lightly over his. "I am not afraid," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "We have come too far to falter now." Kalen's gaze softened as he looked at her. 18 years ago, a little girl made a promise. Today, that promise could decide the fate of the forest and of us. Alara met his eyes with determination. "Then we make it count," she said. Together, the first movement of the enemy came as a ripple through the forest. Shadows formed into shapes, figures cloaked in dark mist, moving with silent, unnatural grace. They advanced toward the palace walls, and the ancient curse stirred in response to the fear and tension that hung in the air. Kalen drew his sword, its blade gleaming with an otherworldly light. Magic hummed through him, radiating outward to meet the shadows. Alara stepped forward, hands raised, calling upon the magic she had learned over the years. Herbs, whispered spells, and courage became her shield, and together their bond formed a wall against the darkness. The shadows struck, swirling in a chaotic dance, testing their defenses. Kalen moved like a force of nature, every strike precise, every motion commanding. Alara's magic intertwined with his power, creating bursts of light that pushed the darkness back. Yet the enemy was clever and relentless, probing for weaknesses, seeking any crack in their combined strength. "Stay close," Kalen shouted as a shadow lunged at Alara. He intercepted it, his sword slashing through the dark form, dissipating it into smoke. "You are stronger than you know," he added, his voice fierce but filled with admiration. Alara smiled, breathless but unwavering. "And you are exactly as I imagined, Kalen, strong, fearless, and yet you care. That is why we will survive this." The shadows recoiled, hissing like living smoke, and the forest seemed to respond to the bond between them. The magic of the palace, their courage, and the sincerity of their connection pushed the darkness back. But the curse was ancient, patient, and cunning. It would not yield easily. Kalen paused, sensing the deeper force behind the attack. "This is no ordinary enemy," he muttered. "The curse itself awakens now. It will test us in ways we cannot predict. Be ready." Alara took a deep breath, feeling the forest's energy coursing through her. "I am ready," she said. "We have faced fear before, Kalen. This is only another trial." The shadows coalesced into a single, massive form, taller than any tree, its eyes glowing with a dark fire. The curse's essence, ancient and powerful, had awakened fully. Kalen stepped forward, placing himself between the darkness and Alara. "Trust me," he said, his voice low and commanding. "I will protect you." "I trust you," Alara replied, her hand finding his. Together they faced the dark force. The battle was fierce. The shadowed entity struck with lightning speed, its attacks testing both magic and sword. Kalen moved with unmatched skill, every strike cutting through darkness, every movement precise. Alara's spells intertwined with his strikes, creating barriers and flashes of light that disrupted the curse's power. But the entity was clever, shifting constantly, probing their fears and insecurities. It whispered words meant to weaken them, visions of loss, betrayal, and regret. Kalen saw the faces of those he had failed, while Alara saw herself as the helpless child she once had been. Yet they held to each other, grounding themselves in the bond that had brought them together after 18 long years. Kalen's voice rang out, cutting through the whispers. "Alara, look at me. Fear cannot touch us if we stand together. Alara met his gaze, her heart steady. Together, she said. Her magic flared brighter, illuminating the chamber, the shadows recoiling from the light of their combined courage. The dark entity shrieked, shifting violently, as if struggling against the force of their unity. Kalen pressed forward, his sword glowing with a pure, unwavering light. "This ends now," he declared, every word echoing with authority and purpose. Alara joined him, raising her hands and calling upon every ounce of magic she had learned. The room filled with blinding light, and the shadows screamed as the curse fought against the power of their bond. The palace trembled, walls cracking under the force, yet the two of them held fast. At the climax of the struggle, Kalen and Alara's hands met, and their connection, one born of childhood promise, grown into trust, courage, and love, formed a radiant shield. The dark entity writhed, then shattered into fragments of smoke, dissipating into the air. The curse, ancient and relentless, was broken by the power of their unity. Kalen dropped to one knee, exhausted but triumphant. Alara knelt beside him, her hands resting lightly on his. The forest outside began to breathe again, the mist lifting as sunlight touched the leaves. Birds sang tentatively, and the palace seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it for centuries. Kalen looked at her, stormy eyes now softened with emotion. You have proven yourself beyond any expectation," he said, his voice filled with awe and something tender. "You have faced fear, darkness, and destiny, and you have not wavered. I am proud of you, Alara." Alara smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We did it together," she said. "I could not have done it without you, Kalen." For the first time in years, Kalen allowed himself to be vulnerable. I feared that allowing you near me would bring ruin, that my world would crush you. But you are stronger than I imagined. You are my equal, my bond, my promise kept." Alara's heart fluttered. "And I will always keep it," she said softly. "No matter what comes, no matter the trials ahead, I will remain true to the words I spoke long ago." Kalen's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile, the first one she had ever seen unshadowed by duty or fear. He reached out, cupping her face gently, and she leaned into his touch. "Then let us leave behind fear, the curse, and the shadows of the past," he whispered. "Let us step into what comes next together." They rose, standing side by side on the balcony as the forest shimmered in the morning light. The mist lifted slowly, revealing the beauty of the kingdom beyond, the life that had been waiting for them to claim it. For the first time, Kalen allowed himself to feel hope, not as a king, but as a man who had rediscovered love and trust. Alara looked up at him, her brown eyes shining. "We have faced the darkness, Kalen. Now we choose our future, together." Kalen's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Together," he echoed. And in that word was the weight of promises, the strength of courage, and the warmth of love. Yet even as the light touched the forest and the palace, Kalen's instincts remained alert. Somewhere deep within the shadows of the world, forces still lingered, watchers who would not forgive the breaking of the curse, enemies who would challenge their bond. But for the first time, Kalen knew that whatever came, they would face it as one. Their bond, tested and proven, was stronger than any darkness. As the sun rose higher, the forest seemed to come alive, colors vivid, birds singing, and magic settling peacefully over the land. Kalen turned to Alara, his gray eyes warm and fierce all at once. "You have changed me," he said. "You have reminded me that even kings are not immune to hope, to trust, to love. You are my heart, Alara." Alara smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle within her. "And you are mine, Kalen, always." The wind carried their words across the forest, whispering promises of new beginnings. The curse was broken, the shadows dispersed, and yet their story was only beginning, a story forged by courage, destiny, and the love that had survived 18 long years. Together they stepped back into the palace, not as king and subject, not as ruler and villager, but as two hearts bound by promise, trust, and a love that had endured the tests of time. The Alpha King and the fearless woman had found each other once more, and the world, for all its dangers, could not break the bond they had forged. The forest, calm now, seemed to acknowledge their victory, yet the winds whispered of future challenges, distant, subtle, but always present. And both Kalen and Alara knew that no matter what awaited them, their hearts were entwined, their courage unbroken, and their love eternal.